Hello, people. It's me, and I just wanted to thank you and everybody else who decided to partake in the vote that we did. Our winners was a discussion video about characters in the show. So I think we should go on a long discussion about everything you need to know about the characters, the story, and much, much more. So buckle up. This might be a long video. Hopefully not, but let's get started. Now, this all starts a little before the metal virus. So obviously, Eggman's been beat after the whole, situation. He has another beating, and he's a little upset about this. And Dr. Starline decides to ask a crucial question to Mr. Eggman over here. He asks,
Eggman, your genius is amazing, but I have a question for you.
What might that be, Starline?
Have you ever made an organic robot before?
and this is what starts up everything. Now, obviously, Eggman gets started making a few robots to be organic. This is where we get our robot boys. Now, first, obviously, we have Metal, because he is Eggman's first robot. And we're going to have Android next, but not original Android, because he's just Silver Sonic or Mark Zero Sonic. So we start out with those two. Then Eggman tries organic with Lin 6, and obviously it's not really organic, so it doesn't really work, but he still cares for the robot. Then we get Crimson, who is basically a pre-existing Mobian, which Eggman killed to use to make organic. And it worked, but he's kind of still robotic. And Eggman still treats him like a son. Next one we have is Android, who kind of was Robot Sonic Mark Zero, but Eggman decides to make it so it's more organic using the same DNA that Crimson had. And this becomes successful as an experiment, and he almost has a more Sonic-like form, although Eggman's not as happy about this one. And then the final experiment and the most successful one was Pixels, who worked fully, but Eggman isn't very kind to Pixels. Now, the reason I put this in is because in Spike Dream's animations, it seems that Eggman was almost Pixels' father, which is why I added this in here. Around the same time, Eggman begins on the metal virus, learning how to use organic and metal to kind of merge into the virus, which would take over the host and turn them into a metal zombie, which would infect all organic life. And using the organic robot's DNA to kind of help him make this is how it started. Although he had a few prototypes, which we'll hear about later, definitely. Now, Eggman seems to be caring to the more less organic robots he has, and it's kind of strange as to why, but it seems that he used most of either Crimson's DNA and some of Sonic's DNA to make some of the more organic beings, which might be why he doesn't treat the other organic beings much as his friends and instead has hatred for them, which is why Android and Pixels might have been almost like attacked by Eggman, because it seems he only cared for the more less organic robots. Now, around the same time, we get into a different story, which is what makes a little bit of this AU different from others. Well, first of all, let's talk about what makes it a tiny bit different, being the good part, and then we'll go into the bad part. The good part is that this is when Silver tells SBO that he's kind of been crushing on him after Sonic Rivals 2. And they start training together before the fact, and he tells him about it. Or basically, in the comics, you know how Blaze talks to Silver after he gets kicked out of the Diamond Cutters? Essentially, it's SBO who talks to him that time, and later on they start dating. So that's the good news part. the bad news part is that the reason why this is called the 3 years AU is because it takes 3 years after Eggman's ship crashed, and later on they found the body. So basically, Eggman crashes and he dies in a crash, leaving Sonic and friends to now have an Eggman-less game, kind of. So Eggman basically stops existing in this AU. Now, I already know what you're thinking. Did you just use this to write Eggman out of the story? And no, actually, this is where I start with the characterization part. You see, Eggman, while being dead, his presence isn't. Sure, he definitely died in that crash, but his presence has not disappeared. He is very much still existing throughout the story, and we'll get more into that later, probably in the other parts. But for right now, let's talk more about, well, what happens afterwards. After the crash, obviously, they have to clean up everything. So Restoration starts a big project as they clean up all of the crossfires and from the crash zone. There are a few casualties. Obviously, this is bad. Sally has to make a public announcement saying that Restoration and a bunch of other people working for the government will be working hard to clean everything up, including guns workers who are making sure that there aren't any other projects or other involvements in the plane crash. So obviously, that's all happening. Now, characters like Clutch the Opossum, who's working with Surge, Kit, and Duo the Octopus Cat, he instructs them basically, lay low. We'll wait for when Sonic and his team are just about ready to get back to normal. So basically, they have to lay low and just live life. They don't really have any duties to do. So they basically just get laid off until work is needed, while those guys collect all of the Eggman remaining parts as they can, being disguised as gun workers and such. This is also around the same time when Surge meets String, and I think you guys know what happens next if you're already listening and you've seen what happens. Those two are now canonically dating, which is hilarious. Also around this time, Restoration has seen more egg fields kind of all around. So Mighty is instructed to go help in a remote area where they think people might be. But when Mighty goes to investigate, it seems pretty empty already, and all of the life nearby is kind of dead. And this is around the time Mighty gets mutated from being in long exposure to metal virus defectos, basically the beginning of the virus, but kind of more organic, makes you grow bigger and kind of have a taste for other organic life. Kind of like a normal zombie infection, except this one mutates your body and makes you hungry for organic life, instead of making you just search it out to infect it. And this is when Mighty disappears after Gun finds him, and they kind of trap him to keep him safe. I'm also going to add in a couple of side details you don't know. If you haven't already known this, Scourge is alive, and he's still here. He's basically learned to disguise himself using help from another source who we'll find out about later. This other source gives him a sonic disguise, so he pretends to be just a normal other universe Sonic, which Sonic's pretty used to because of Classic and Scourge in general. So obviously he doesn't think much of it. Spades joins Gun to kind of infiltrate and later becomes good friends with Mighty, and makes it all the worse when Mighty later on goes missing after leaving the house to go explore and look for his friend Ray. Now, let's talk more about the Mighty disappearance, as this kind of leaves a big chunk that we haven't explored yet in the story. So basically, Mighty disappears, and obviously his friend Ray, the flying squirrel, is heartbroken by the fact that his best friend just went missing. Obviously, this is very scary, especially after the crash. People are thinking that the metals have been secretly taking people down and that Eggman might have been planning an attack purposefully to fake his death and make this happen. He's done it before, so it wouldn't have been the first time until they discovered Eggman's body in the wreckage. And later on, his talking after he knew this day would come, he would die, and him telling everyone the warnings about that. This would bleed into year 2, which would be our next step in this huge event. Of course, we'll finish up with talking about characters first. Let's go ahead and talk about what Sonic and friends are really experiencing right now. Obviously, Amy's going through a lot of stress right now. Her and Jewel are working hard to make sure Restoration can do their best to keep everybody nice and safe, and suddenly one of the workers has gone missing in a flash. This is terrifying. But they still have to work hard to make sure everything is nice and all covered up, and to make sure that none of the badniks that are still out there will keep attacking any of the villages nearby. Amy feels like she's really stressed right now, but she's definitely making the work a lot easier, along with the diamond cutters helping out in any way they can. The robots are kind of missing around this time, to be discovered later on. Metal has drained all of his power and is basically into hiding right now, while Crimson is going through some things. Linsix is kind of just somewhere, as he's also disappeared. And Pixels has found Zerion, or Zerion, I think I'm saying his name right. I'll just call him Zeph for right now. And Zeph and him basically, Zeph keeps him safe within his house to make sure nobody spots him. But Pixels has a basically foolproof disguise, as he looks like an unrelated hedgehog. And Android is just kind of disappeared, later finding an area to hide so that he doesn't get caught. Around the same time, he gets in contact with another universe in a place called Wasted Hills, where he talks to his protector, labeled as O. Other characters like Whisper get some more characterization, as Whisper is kind of opening herself up to her friends around this time. As Eggman's now gone, she doesn't really feel as much worry, so she starts talking more and opens up a little bit more. Other characters like my 2 favorite boys, Silver and Espio, are getting really close, obviously. I mean, they just started dating, so they're gonna be a little rough around the edges. But they're making a lot of progress in their relationship, and they're kind of getting along very well. Sonic, on the other hand, isn't doing well at all. After the death of Eggman, he's kind of going through his own loop of, is this my fault, and stuff like that. So he's going through the feels. Tails is just kind of okay. He's more surprised as to what the failure of the crash was, and he's doing his best to find the robots, while Shadow is kind of taking his job at Guns more seriously, following what Maria said to protect his planet, to make sure everybody's safe. Now this would be the end of year 1 and the end of this video. Each year we'll get a separate video, and maybe we'll even create a timeline for this, along with extra characterization and stuff like that. I think this went over all of the crucial details, and next time we'll get over a bigger situation involving me kind of fixing the timeline to make it more suitable for the story. and maybe a special super character will get involved later. Other characters like Heaven are indeed canon, as she's the daughter of Mephiles after he kind of made a little mistake, maybe looking a little too much like Shadow, and decided to clone himself to see what would happen. And unfortunately, it ended up making him a daughter, which is good for us, but he wasn't really ready to be a father. She later goes on to date Mighty, but we'll get into that later, along with all of the other ship dynamics. You already heard about SBO Silver. We already know about Surge and String, and maybe even a new ship, Crimson and Scourge. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So we'll get more into that stuff later, along with other characters like Xeron getting more in the second part, him being a news reporter and keeping the Pixels safe for the time being. So obviously he got a lot of news out of the Eggman event. Like I said, more stuff is going to be covered in the next video. This one is kind of just an explaining one, so I think that would be good for it for right now. Now, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching. I will finish this as soon as possible to post it. Thanks, guys.